Okay, so we're going to go back to the first project here and we're going to do a save as, and we'll still go to the desktop and I'll create a new folder and I'll call this button, and I'll call the file button as well, and we'll run it just to see what it looks like again. So it still works the same way. So what I want to do is I want to create a button down here that just makes it play to go to the other side. Okay, so I'm going to start off by creating a layer. You always want a layer for your button. So I'm going to go ahead and call this button. And the reason for that is because sometimes you get your buttons behind objects. So any kind of navigation or interface you want on the highest layer possible. And it's not always going to be the top layer, but the highest layer possible. That way when you create the button, you don't accidentally bury it behind other artwork. Okay, so I'm going to make a circle down here on the bottom. And just to make it look a little bit more like a button, I'm going to increase the width of the stroke here. So I'll select the stroke. I'm hitting the letter A to grab my selection tool. Grab that. Actually, I wanted to do the letter V. There we go. And now I'll go ahead and make that a little bit thicker. Okay, so while it's still selected, I'm going to make this into a symbol. So you can either do an F8. In some cases, you need that FN key on a Mac, and then the F key, or rather the function key F8. I'm just going to go to the Modify drop-down menu, and down over here there's a Convert to Symbol. And the symbol type I want is a button. And I'll go ahead and name it button. Not necessary, but it kind of makes sense when we see in the library. We can see what it is that we're dealing with. Okay, so now that it's a button, we want to program it for the rollover. So I'm going to double click and go inside the button. If I double click in here, it shows me the preview of the button inside the button symbol relative to the desktop. So just like last time, it was just a regular shape, and I wrapped a symbol around it so that I can do some interactivity with it. And the type of symbol that it was created was a button, so I would get this type of a timeline. If I go back to the main stage, you can see that we're right back where we were before. And this guy over here is a graphic symbol, and this guy over here is a button symbol. So you could give it a name if you had a lot of choices, but we're going to make this as easy as possible. We're going to allow the computer to program it for us. So first thing we want to do is do the interface. So we'll double click, go inside the button. You can either double click in here, and then it shows you the preview relative to the desktop, or you can double click on the button itself, and that it will only show you the button without any reference to the desktop. They both do the same thing. So what we need is, this is the up, what it's going to look like when it's on top, and then when you roll over it, it's going to be this frame over here. So in here, I'm clicking on this frame, and I'm going to do an F6 or an FNF6 if you have to. Or you can just leave it where it is and do another FNF6. So let me undo this. So I can click over here and then just start doing F6, and I need 3 of them. The hit area, we'll worry about that later. Okay, so on the over, the fill is going to be yellow. Doesn't have to be, but that's what I'm making it. And on the down, the fill is going to be red. Okay, so let's take it for a test run. We can test run it from here, Command Return or Control on a PC. There's our button. If we roll over it, you can see that the button changes to yellow. If I click down on it, it turns to red. So that's how you get the interface going on the button. Now we need to program it. So first things first, we need to program it, but we also need to stop the animation from running. So we need a JavaScript on the first frame. So move your playhead. This is the playhead. That's called scrubbing. Move the playhead to the very first frame. And we're going to do it the easy way. We're going to go with code snippets. Code snippets are a set of commands that Animate has given us. Now, most of the projects that we're going to be working in are going to be in HTML5. We're not going to need any actions in ActionScript, and this is for Flash. It might be a good idea for you to just go ahead and delete it now. And if you delete the code, you can always bring it back. So let me show you. So I'm going to go to select it, come over here and go to delete snippet. Do I want to delete it? Yep, I'm deleting the action code. Now, for some reason you need it later, you can go ahead and do a reset to the default XML, and then it brings it back. So just to avoid problems, delete the action script for now. And we'll go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, so in here, there are the snippets for our controlling our timeline, and we want it to stop. So timeline navigation, if you open this up, there's a stop at this frame. So since we've got this frame selected in here, it's going to add another layer. It's going to call it the actions layer, and that's where our events and actions in JavaScript go. So we'll double click on this while we're on the first frame. Now we'll double click. And it added the code. Let me open this a little bit wider so we can see what it says. And if I move this down in here, you can see over here, move my timeline a little bit bigger. Now we've got 3 layers, and there's our actions layer. So this is going to stop the frame from running. It's got some instructions there. It can also stop a movie clip from running, but more on that later. So if I run this, now it's not running. Now I got to get this button when I click on it to make that play. So we've got the first phase out of it. So I don't need my instructions anymore, so I'm going to click and drag all the way to the top and delete that. And now come in here and do a couple of returns. And now I'm going to bring in the code that's going to control the button. So normally you would select the button and give it an instance name to be able to program it. But Animate will do this for you as well, and it'll just start naming things button 1, button 2. So if you decide you want to name it, you might call it something like play. And you can't use any unusual characters. You can't start the name with a number, but you can end it with a number if you wanted to. But for now, I'm just going to ignore this. And I'm going to select here, and then I'm going to close this. And what I want to do is create an event when something happens, this is going to play. And so what I'm looking for is an event handler. So if I've got a button on my horn and I push the button, the event is the button being pushed, and that event causes the horn to go off. If I have an alarm and the doors all function as buttons, the event is open the door. It doesn't matter what door I open, they all play the alarm. So some kind of event has to happen before it'll start to play. So in here we're going to go to the event handler, and our choices are on mouse click, on mouse over, out, and double click. So you have to have the button selected, and as soon as I double click on the mouse click, it's going to name this button number 1, and it's going to add code to my actions layer over here. So let's go ahead and click on that. The button is selected, and double click. And so it's telling us that the symbol requires an instance name. That means it's going to name it for us. Animate will create an instance name before applying the code snippet. Now you can do don't show again, it doesn't matter. Go ahead and hit OK. And there's the name in here. Let me click on the button in here. There's the name that it gave it, button number 1. And inside the code on the first frame, we got some more code. Let me open this a bit wider. And so over here, I'll get rid of this gray stuff and I'll just explain what's going on. So Animate created an event listener. So in this canvas, in this file, you'll find something called button number 1. And that's what's on the desktop. This thing was named button number 1. So it's going to find this button over there. And it's going to listen for an event on button number 1. And the button event is going to be a click. And as soon as it sees the click, then it's going to run this function called mouse click handler. And here's the name. This name in here is this name over here. This calls up this function. And right now it's currently set up for a click or clicked. So if I run it, every time I run this, I'm going to get an alert that tells me that the mouse was clicked. That's the setup. And so what I want to do is change the code in here so it'll play. So I don't need any of this stuff. Here's the instructions again. I don't need those. What I need is to say on this canvas, it's technically not a canvas, but for our purposes right now, we can think of it as the canvas. In this canvas, you're going to tell it to play. So just type in play, and we'll do open and close parentheses. And not within the name of the function, but any kind of code that you put in has to have a semicolon at the end. Technically doesn't have to have it, but it's a good practice to put it in there. So this is kind of like a sentence. This is in this stage, that's kind of like the subject, and this is the verb. Sometimes you can put additional information in here, but we're just telling it to play. Same thing with the stop. It's the same situation. In this particular frame, we're going to tell it to stop. And this is the main level of the directory. So now it's going to work. So we'll do command return. And now when I push this, it adds the play. And it comes to a stop because it's going back to the beginning. So basically, when you push play, the playhead moves along, and then when it gets to the end of the animation, when it gets over here, since it's got nothing to stop it, it just goes right back over here. And that's the setup for the button. You just click on it, and it does the play. Now let's make it a little bit more fancy. So I want it to go over here and then come back. So I'm going to grab frame 30. I'm going to click here on frame 30, and I'm going to insert a keyframe. So click in here, and I'll go ahead and insert a keyframe. Or you can do an F6, FN F6 or F6. Now that I'm at frame 30, in here I'm going to put another stop. So I'll go ahead and do a this dot stop, open and close parentheses, semicolon. That's the command. So here's what's going to happen. This is going to play until it gets to the halfway point. It's going to stop there. Then I'm going to play it again, and it's going to continue all the way. And then it's going to whip back over here to the front. So let's see what that looks like. So play, it'll stop in the center now. If I click play again, it moves forward, but it whipped back to the back. So now what I want to do is I want to change my animation. I want this frame here to be in the middle. That way when the animation starts and it gets to the stop, it's going to stop right there. Then I want it to go back to this frame, so I'm just going to hold the Option key down, click on this frame, clicking once to select it, and then hold the Option key down, click, and drag it to the very end. So now we have a frame number 1. It goes to frame 30 to this position. From frame 30, it goes back to frame 60, and there's our animation. So now if we run this, this is going to send it over to the right side, and it's going to stop, and this is going to send it back. And that's our animation. So now we have something that looks like it's some kind of a toggle or a control relative to how this is working. So that's pretty much it in terms of how you control the button interface. Of course, it doesn't have to just be a translation. This type of motion is called a translation. You can even rotate it. So over here, I'm going to grab my free transform tool, and I'm going to give it a little rotation just like that. And now you see that it rotates, it pivots up, and then it pivots back to the position in terms of how it animates. And if you wanted to, you could go back to the center here, And we can change it to another position, and we're going to make this bigger. So this is where I want it to get bigger. So now it's going to come over here, it's going to get bigger, and now it's going to go back to where it was. So it's just a matter of having, like, the first frame and the last frame should be the same, and then you just click on it and it does whatever you set it up to do, and then it goes back to the original position. So in here, because this is going back to this position, you could have another extra, another animation where you kind of walk it through, but this is the basic idea for how the button is supposed to work. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the hit area. So I'm going to make my text black. I'm going to make a text box, no stroke. Grab a text box, and I'll just do impact for now. And right over here where my button is located in the artwork, go back to where the artwork is, and I'm going to type in a text box the word play. Open that box a little bit wider, and I'm going to move that right in there. So now, and I'll center this. So if I run this, command return, I get the Mickey Mouse glove on the button itself, but not on the word play. And I'd like the word play also to activate the button. So that's what the hit area does. So if I go inside the button and I go to the hit, I'm going to do an F6 there. That way I get the artwork from the button coming in. And I'm going to create an additional rectangle that's going to cover up the letters. Now, the hit areas and the buttons, the strokes do nothing. It's the solid area that counts. So I'm in the hit area. I'm just going to go ahead and draw an additional rectangle. I'll change the color in here to red just so it stands out a little bit more. And so I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag right across over here and cover up the letters. Don't worry about how it's cutting this up. This is going to work. And if you really wanted to, you don't need the stroke over here. You can click on that and get rid of it. That's our hit area. So now when we run this, you'll see as soon as I roll over the play, it's treating the play like it's part of the button, but it isn't. It's the hit area that activates it. And if I didn't have that there, if it was just the word play, the text would flicker. So you got to be careful when you're putting in a text inside the button as well. That would work too, but for now that's one way of doing it. So let's run that. And that's the setup. Okay, so that's the installation of a button. Easy peasy.